Welcome back to Faith for Dummies, aka us. Hi Izzy, hello everyone.
Hi Rob. Hi everyone else.
How you doing this week, Izzy?
Yeah, I'm all right. It's been an up and down couple of weeks, but I'm okay. How are you?
Yeah, good. Similar thing. I've had a very busy week, so I'm still a bit like so much work to do, but I'm all right. I'm good. Yeah. So, do you have any dummy moments to share with us for this week, Izzy?
I think I'm all right this week. What about you?
No, none for me this week. But I think we said in this situation we would do one from like a dummy moment from our lives. I've got a lot of dummy moments from my life. I am a dummy person. Anyway, okay. Do you remember COVID times when everything went on Zoom?
I really do, yeah.
You remember the whole classic "you're on mute" thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and no one being able to hear what's being said. So we're on a church meeting. So it's not just my youth group here, right? But it's the whole church. It's before the meeting when everyone's logging on and we're trying to figure out to start. And I'm half paying attention. I'm logging on, thinking, all right, let's wait for this to start. And all of a sudden, my wife Adele brings some dinner, and I've forgotten the whole muting thing, and I thought I'm on mute, and I'm not. And I said, "Oh, Adele, that dinner looks freaking dope." Couldn't. Yeah. So turns out that the whole church heard me say to my wife that the dinner she made me looks freaking dope.
That is a
Yeah.
weird phrase. I have never heard you use that phrase before.
Well, yeah, I'm not very cool, but I had a few people message me like, "Did you just say that? Is that right?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I did." Our minister had to the minister didn't know it was me, but he said, "Oh, I think someone needs to mute their microphone." Yeah, that was not a good moment for me. I was very embarrassed for the rest of the evening.
Amazing.
Let's move on. I feel like in these dummy moments, Izzy, I've definitely shared more than you.
Yeah, I feel like you have more dummy messages than I do.
I feel like maybe I need to just like send a message to your mum or someone. So have you got any dummy moments for Izzy? And I can just all of a sudden produce that and embarrass you a little bit.
Yeah. You probably need to ask my youth group, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
They probably have some that I've forgotten about that I've blanked out of my brain.
Well, if you are part of Izzy's youth group and you are listening to this podcast right now, get in touch with us and let me know all the dummy moments that Izzy's done. Because I'm making a fool out of myself on my own here. And it was meant to be a mutual kind of thing, but it's not really worked out like that, has it?
They'll happen. They'll happen.
All right, okay. Maybe next time.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Who's next? Me. So easy. So Izzy, this week we're not answering a question, but we're going to hear about your testimony, your story about how you became a Christian and what's God doing in your life. Because we had mine a few weeks ago, didn't we? So this time it's your turn.
Yeah, we thought it was my turn eventually.
So let's just get stuck in. Why don't you tell us a bit about how you grew up, what life was like for you in terms of your faith before you became a Christian?
Yeah, great. So, I grew up in Leicester. I have two parents and one brother, and a very like normal, happy childhood. But I was very much raised in a house where faith was not a thing. It wasn't that we couldn't ever talk about it; we just didn't because it didn't need to be talked about. I think my parents, I think if you push them, they'd probably describe themselves as atheists, but realistically, like I didn't even know that word. We just didn't talk about faith, never went to any sort of faith related stuff. We celebrated Christmas, but we didn't even really celebrate Easter. And so that's kind of the background of what I grew up in. When I was about maybe 13, 14, 15, started thinking a bit more about my faith and what I thought about God or the idea of a God, and basically decided I was an atheist. And I was pretty strong in my atheism.
Yeah.
I wasn't particularly like picking fights with anybody or whatever, but if you'd asked me about my faith or you'd asked me what I thought about God, I would probably tell you the idea of God was really stupid, and what was the point in believing in it? It was like this feeling of like anybody who believes in God is just believing in a fairy story. Like it's not even a thing I need to explore or research because it's just ridiculous. It's like telling me that Tinkerbell exists, or like it
Yeah.
was a bit,
Yeah.
I don't know, it just didn't make sense to me. So yeah, I was very kind of adamant that I was an atheist and that God didn't exist. And I think that's just how I ambled on for a few years, basically. My parents felt the same. I think my brother probably felt the same. And they're still the same now. Like that's probably where they would be now.
Mm.
And so it just wasn't really in my life. I had one grandma who was a Christian, and she is wonderful, my grandma, but she's kind of your traditional Christian, like she
Yeah.
went to a C of E, Church of England kind of Anglican church, and she would talk about God very occasionally at Christmas or whatever. And she had, I remember she had like a Christian kids CD. So when we went to her
Mm.
house, we'd put it on, and there was a song called Kids of the Kingdom, and we would like dance around her living room to that song. But that's it. That
Good.
was like my only way into Christianity, apart from RE lessons at school, where I didn't really pay attention. And then, yeah, I got to the age of 15, so I was in, I want to say year 11, beginning of year 11.
Yeah.
And one of my friends basically invited me to a church youth group, and that was almost my first step, like footstep into a church, I think.
Okay. So basically, around 15, right? You were
Yeah.
pretty convinced atheist, but then you've been invited to church by your friends. So I'm guessing you went. So why don't you tell us what happened next?
Yeah, so uh, I will preface this with we talked about flirt to convert in a previous episode,
We did.
and it's
Remember?
kind of part of my story. So my friend was not a Christian. She went to this local youth group, and the reason she went, I think, and the reason I wanted to go when she invited me was because of the boys. We went to an all-girls school. I was very shy. I didn't know any boys apart from maybe one or two who had been on like a drama camp, and they were not boys I wanted to go out with. And I was nearly 16, and I really, really wanted to meet some boys. So, and if you'd known me back then, that you would have laughed at that because I was so shy that I wouldn't even talk to a stranger, let alone a boy. But I went along because I was just at that stage of life where you're kind of getting to know like relationships and that kind of thing. And all of my friends were in relationships. Well, that's how it felt. So I thought I'll go along. I'm sure I'll meet some boys there. And I knew there was one guy who was going to be there that was like someone I really fancied because we were friends on Facebook. So I really hope he never listens to this. So we went along. And yeah, I just went for a few weeks. They played games like, classic youth group games. And we,
Yeah.
would go out to the local park and do like wide games and rounders and all that kind of thing. Went along for a few weeks, just simply enjoying the games and the kind of social aspect of everything. And there was a talk each week. And at the start, I just wasn't really listening to it. There were some songs and they were kind of nice. I like to sing, but I didn't really believe what I was singing. I didn't really believe, I honestly don't remember the talks. And that's probably not because they weren't good. They just weren't for me. I wasn't in that stage of life yet. And then one of the leaders did a talk one week about basically about Jesus' death on the cross, which seems really obvious. Like that, it wasn't meant to be a gospel conversion talk, but he was talking about Jesus' death on the cross. And up to this point, the Bible was still a fairy story to me. God was still this ridiculous thing that people believed in. And I didn't really know anything about Jesus. I knew he was involved in the story, but I just had never really heard anything about Jesus, just about God, the creator. And
Yeah.
yeah, he told the story about Jesus dying on the cross. And he described with excruciating detail what it would have been like to have been hung on a cross. And I don't know if you've ever heard or read that kind of detail, or if you've seen like The Passion of the Christ, the film. I think that's what it's called. It's so horrific. And there must have been other things going on in my head as well. But as I heard that detail, I was just so moved and I was so bothered almost by the fact that somebody had done that for me. And if this guy Jesus existed, which the evidence pointed towards yes, he did exist, if that's what he did, that's crazy that someone would die for me, whether or not, God was real or not. But the fact that somebody was convinced enough to do that for me was mad. And I think from that day, basically just took more and more steps towards learning about Jesus, learning about what he'd done, about what the Bible actually said about Jesus. So it went from God being this kind of fairy story, fictitious character to Jesus being this real man who had really died for me and really had a life that was worth researching and exploring. And so I had all these big questions about creation and suffering and who God was and all these kinds of
Yeah.
questions. And really, it just boiled down to I just fell in love with Jesus and what he'd done for me, which I think a lot of people would say happened when they became a Christian. But yeah, it wasn't this kind of like lightning bolt moment of like, I suddenly believed something I didn't believe. I still had lots of questions, but I couldn't get past the fact that Jesus loved me that much. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what pushed me over the edge. And then, yeah, still had lots of questions. And the thing that really helped me was being discipled by my youth leader.
Mhm.
She is a wonderful woman called Caris. I still know her. Um, she's just one of the best people I know. And she was our youth leader for years and years. And she just poured her heart and soul into the young people. And she would take me out for coffee like once a fortnight. And we just talk about the Bible. We talk about my questions, my relationships, my friendships. We talk about everything. And I look back on those
Yeah.
days and I just remember like that is what helped me stay in the faith, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. I mean, we can't really argue with how important those relationships with those people investing in us are. And as youth leaders, both you and I now, that is what we strive to do really for our churches, our youth groups. So if you're listening to that, either at my youth group or Izzie's youth group, know that we want the best for you. We want to invest in you as well. So yeah, I mean, you had a pretty quick and dramatic turnaround from complete atheist to suddenly calling yourself a Christian. How did the people in your life then respond to that?
Yeah, that was the hard part. So on my side, it was this, few months of learning about Jesus, falling in love with him, loving my youth group. I should caveat that I did not end up dating the boy that I had gone to youth group to meet.
Yeah, yeah,
But everything was going really well. I was getting new friends, like I started dating, or maybe that was a bit later on. Yeah, a bit later on, I started dating one of the boys. But I was like, getting new friends, meeting these youth leaders, going to church, like learning so much, getting really invested in the
Mhm.
Bible. It was brilliant. But there were some people in my life that found that really hard. So I had a couple of
Okay.
really close friends. Distinctly remember one of them, I called him to tell him that I'd become a Christian, and he was, really like hard and fast atheist, and he just laughed down the phone. Like I'd had to hang up the phone because he wasn't speaking. He was just laughing at me, and that was really horrible. And it was a moment, along with a couple of other friends, commenting on it, where I just thought, what is the point? Because I'm going to lose my
Yeah,
friends over this,
yeah,
or I'm going to be laughed at and mocked for this. And that was really hard. And I mean, my family were wonderful. Like, my parents are incredibly respectful of other people and incredibly kind of, they really love my brother and I, and they love us being independent and figuring out the world for ourselves. So they were never, ever horrible about it. But they didn't believe it, and they didn't want
yeah,
to come to church with me. And so that was, the responses were interesting. Some people very much laughing about it and being like, you're crazy. And some people kind of like, okay, that's nice for you, I guess we've got to factor in church now to our lives.
yeah,
Yeah, I think sometimes it's easy to kind of see, oh, I've become a Christian and all these great things are happening because I've found Jesus. But actually, there's other people in your life who you might be alienating yourself from at that point, or relationships that might change. And that is really, really hard. So if that's something you've
yeah,
gone through or are thinking you might go through, I can sit with you in that and understand that. Basically, I can sympathize.
yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that must have been really hard and maybe still difficult sometimes now. Even I've got family, even though I was raised in a Christian family, who like aren't Christian or made a decision and then just chose to go away from that. So I get it a little bit. How would you say your faith has changed and grown over the years since that then?
Yeah, I think for like a lot of people want, when they ask for a testimony, they want that like moment of transformation, which is great. But for me, I think the last 12 years, in 12 years since I became a Christian,
Well,
have been like the bigger kind of the bigger part of it. I think I had not made a lot of mistakes by the time I was 16. I was pretty
mhm.
shy and pretty introverted, kept myself to myself. I wasn't perfect by any means, but I had not really had any big things happen in my life. And it was only after I became a Christian that I, got into relationships I shouldn't have been in. I made mistakes I shouldn't have made. I
Yeah,
kind of started understanding what sin and guilt were. I had things happen in my family or in my life that were really hard. Um, suffering, anxiety, and all that kind of stuff. And I think I expected to become a Christian and then life would get better. And that's just not what happened. So, yes, I think all of that said, my relationship with God looks very different than it did. I think right at the start, I was just amazed by Jesus and I just fell in love with him and I wanted to find out as much as I could. And actually, over the last 12 years, I've gone up and down with my doubts and my worries, with my questions, with how strong or weak my faith is. I've never had a moment where I've completely lost my faith, but
Yeah.
it was really, really hard. There were some times where suffering was really, really strong and things were really difficult. And I would think, it would just be easier to go back to when I was 14, 15. And I didn't know about God. I didn't have to consider all these big questions because I didn't know about him. And I could just never quite go back. I could never quite leave God because there was even just a tiny little mustard seed in me that was clinging on to the truth about who Jesus was. But yeah, I think some of the hardest times have happened since I became a Christian. Even recently, some really big moments of suffering have happened in my life, and I've had to ask myself where my faith is. Is my faith in a God who does everything I want and who is everything I think he should be, or is my faith in a God who has bigger plans and a bigger vision than I can see? And that's a massive reason why I got into youth work. I didn't mean to, and I didn't necessarily want to become a youth worker, but I think God kind of led me there for a reason. And part of that is to bring my experience to the lives of the young people that I get to have the privilege of meeting and working with, because it's the most important thing in my life. And I can't think of anything better to do with my time than introduce young people to Jesus and go on that journey with them.
Brilliant. Amazing. That's really, really cool. Yeah. So thank you, Izzie, for sharing all that with us. It's really great to hear that for you and the differences really in like my New Testament and your testimony, but the similarities and the same God overall. And perhaps the listeners are thinking that's I can relate to like most of what you're saying, or they're like, oh, it's really different, but still really interesting. So yeah, brilliant. Let's end with a challenge back to the people listening.
Yeah, let's do that. I think that's so true that our testimonies are so different, but we're both kind of in this faith journey together. So my challenge this week would be, if you go to church or youth group, find someone at your church or at your youth group that has a testimony that is completely different to yours. That might involve having to ask a few people how they got to know Jesus, but find someone whose testimony is completely different and see how you could encourage each other with those differences.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's such a nice thing to be asked as well when someone says, "Oh, how did you become a Christian?" Because they're clearly taking an interest in you and also in faith and your story as well. So if you do this challenge, which we are recommending that you should do, people will be encouraged by you asking this as well, and I think you'll learn something as well. So yeah, that's really cool. Thanks, Izzie. What questions shall we look at next week?
Next week, we're going to look at a very basic question that maybe we should have looked at in week one. But we haven't really talked about this yet. So we're going to answer the question, what is the gospel and how do I explain it? So we've been talking about testimonies, how we came to know Jesus. So probably a good place to be.
Yeah, I mean, heck, who knows? You might be listening to this in the right order, like when it's released, but you might find this comes at the perfect point. So in which case, we've done it exactly as we were meant. So, yeah, who knows? On that note, we hope that you'll find it useful. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to say goodbye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Izzie.
Bye.